So we're all aware that Star Wars Destiny was an incredibly unique game when it came to the world of TCGs. And while, yes, what made it unique was the You-Go-I-Go system and, of course, the dice, the thing that perhaps made Destiny truly stand out from other TCGs was actually the lack of an instant or reaction type mechanic. And while the absence of an instant speed type card was critical to supporting the You-Go-I-Go nature of the game, it did lead to the rise of the before timing effect. And today I'm going to discuss why, from a certain point of view, the before effect was, and remains, Destiny's dumbest mechanic. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Happy Destiny Friday, my ARH Destiny friends, and welcome back to the Commando cast. So, first off, today's video is all in good fun, okay? I understand, obviously, why the before mechanic is functionally necessary for certain things to work in this game. But we have to admit, it doesn't conceptually make it any less silly. And in fact, I think it's kind of funny. It might actually be like the most Star Wars things about this game, because it conjures, at least to me, visions of 5-year-olds playing lightsabers in the backyard. I got you, I chopped your head off. Yeah, well, okay, but before I die, I threw my lightsaber into your chest, so now we both die. Haha. Right? You understand what I'm saying, right? We've all been there in our lives. We get it. So yeah, I think the before mechanic is just kind of hilarious in concept, right? So first, let's talk about what I'm talking about, the baseline on what I'm talking about, and discuss why we actually need the before mechanic in this game. So functionally, it's similar to an instant speed effect that we see in other games, right? So what I have up right now are some classic magic cards, right? I know the evil game magic, but we have Lightning Bolt and Prodigal Pyromancer, right? But any other creature that has some sort of, instant speed effect, right? You can tap him at any time, right? Anytime you have priority to deal 1 damage to target. So what you can do is if your opponent is using Lightning Bolt to blow up your Pyromancer, before the Lightning Bolt resolves, you can, or as the Lightning Bolt goes, as it's played and prior to it resolving, you can tap the Pyromancer to deal 1 damage. Its effect resolves and then goes to the next card on the stack. Lightning Bolt resolves, dealing the 3 to kill the Pyromancer. Right, so that's functionally at a very, very, very basic level how instant speed mechanics or reactions or whatever you may call them depending on which game system you're playing. But again, you get it, right? Functionally, that's how the instants work. And we didn't really have that in Destiny in the truest sense, right? Because Destiny was marketed as a You-Go-I-Go mechanical game, right? That was the promise, what we were sold. That and big chunky dice, of course, right? And Destiny largely succeeded at that from a macro point of view. Fundamentally, because of that structure, then, there were no need for instants or interrupts or reactions in terms of cards, because that wasn't how the game was conceptually structured. However, as we're all aware, there arose certain situations in which, from a mechanical standpoint, things had to happen outside of the actions, right? So, with understanding the functional why of the before mechanic, then, as I'm saying, why is it so dumb, right? And at a high level, to me, it's because it forms functionally paradoxical situations. Right? Again, for those who've played other games and are familiar with it, from a practical standpoint, we understand that it's just how it works in these games. We get it, right? But the fact that it's a before is a term that not really any other game uses, right? And what I mean simply by that is, from a paradoxical standpoint, like I said, simply, how can I do something before something happens if it hasn't happened yet, right? So take, for example, when a character becomes defeated, right? And this is where a lot of things actually stem from. So any number of triggers can actually happen, including saving that character's own life with something like second chance, right? So if we look at second chance, and then you actually have to consider on top of that other stack triggers like redeploy and all that, right? But we understand what second chance does, right? Before the character dies, you actually do something instead, right? You actually heal it up to 5 and all that, right? So we get what the card does and what it was meant to do, but functionally, right, it's the before that makes it weird. It's like, how can I die if I didn't die, right? How can I trigger a dying effect if I didn't die, right? So to me, it would have made a lot more sense if Second Chance actually said something like, if a character would be dealt lethal damage, instead do X, right? Functionally, it's the same, right? But it's far less confusing because you don't have to worry about the other trigger not having resolved, or I guess it's not a trigger. You don't have to worry about the state not having resolved yet, right? And this could have universally applied. I mean, there's other situations. I mean, many just for, let's go ahead and look at redeploy, right? Holdout Blaster and General Grievous, right? It made a whole, and we ended up having to, you'll note that both of these cards from Awakening ended up being errata. Redeploy actually got an errata later on to make it more clear. And we understand the why they have to work that way is because, right, when you defeat, everything immediately happens. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? Like Holdout Blaster says, redeploy. Well, actually, on the original printing, to be very clear, it actually said after a character is defeated, move this card. And then it was errated to before because when a character is defeated, immediately moves his own, right? So it just made a whole bunch of weird things. And again, it's an excellent point here that on the original printing of Holdout Blaster, which I'm showing, of kind of where, like, it's just weird, right? Like it started off, they're like, well, even when they functionally designed the first of the game, they're like, well, how can you do that before a character dies? Well, we understand why, right? So anyway, like I said, it kind of brings us to the paradox created by this before mechanic, because how do you have a trigger for something that hasn't happened yet when you can actually prevent the thing from happening, right? So it's like a catch-22. Like if I can, like in the Second Chance case, if I can actually make the character not die, then isn't it not die, right? So that's what I'm saying, like with it being before versus if it was what I had, what I had mentioned previously, which is the do it this instead. If it would be dealt, do this instead, then it's like a replacement effect, right? So I just think it makes it a little less weird. So if we go back to the silly part, right? Let's talk about redeploy again, right? Basically, the situation I pointed out before with the 5-year-olds playing Star Wars is effectively how redeploy works. It's like, okay, well, but before I die, I'm going to throw my blaster to Leia, right? And it's like, well, but you're dead. You can't do that. But I can, because that's how they get. And as I said, it's not a big deal. There are many ways around it in terms of, like, we understand functionally what it's trying to do, and it's not a big deal. But you have to admit it's kind of funny, right? Like, it's kind of dumb. It's like, before something happens, you do this. And it's like, well, but then the thing didn't happen yet, right? So, like I said, it certainly doesn't have to be that way, because redeploy could very easily just say, after this character is defeated, instead of discarding this, move it to another character you control, right? There's really no reason to do the before, at least that I see, and that's what makes it, kind of silly. There's another couple examples. So let's look at Qui-Gon again. I like the Awakenings because it was, the fundamental core of the game, right? We can look at both Qui-Gon and Dooku. Okay, so Qui-Gon says before this character gains one or more shields, you can remove one of the shields to deal 1 damage. And that actually makes sense because in the use here of before, you have to do it before he gains the shield. It doesn't stop him from gaining the shield, doesn't prevent. So, and that makes sense because then, like, you could, if he had 3 shields, you could remove 1 and then he gains the shield, right? So that's, not too bad within the before. In fact, I think that this makes sense on before. Dooku also kind of makes sense on before as well. It's like before he's dealt damage, you can do something to gain a shield, right? Those make sense. But you have to remember, if we just removed before entirely, even for cards like this, and to where it technically like isn't paradoxical, and by tech, it's not paradoxical really at all, and it works on these 2 cards, you could still say, instead of dealing or whatever, right? You could still use the instead in that place, right? So again, now, anyway, I think you get it. It's just kind of silly that you can have this, the before thing is just a little weird to me. So to close out, before you tell me why I'm wrong, see what I did there? I'm so witty. Now, I want to be clear, right? I completely and 100% acknowledge that it really doesn't matter from a gameplay standpoint, and it is what it is. And, the game's like, 10 years old at this point almost, so it works. It is what it is, and it's fine. But you have to admit, it doesn't make it any less silly. Anyway, thanks for joining me today, friends, and go Commando.